So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for Chamber Chat. We are going to be chatting with Deena Kilmon, the Director of Engagement at the Arc Central Chesapeake Region. And today's topic is diversity and inclusion in the workplace. My name is Sam Shoge, and I am the Executive Director of the Kent County Chamber of Chamber of Commerce, excuse me. And this series is focused on in-depth conversations with key public and private sector leaders on timely subject matters. So this is a new series that we just launched here in the Chamber. Our first episode was with Randall Nixon from the Maryland Department of Planning, where we talked all things census. So this is episode 2, and Deena Kilmon, welcome.
Hi. Thank you.
So,
appreciate it.
I am going to get started with reading your bio. So everybody who has joined us on the call knows a little bit about you, and then we are going to delve into the topic of diversity and inclusion. So Deena Kilmon has more than a decade of experience working with businesses and organizations on Maryland's Eastern Shore. She joins the ARC as the previous sales and marketing director for Chesapeake Harvest, where she built and maintained relationships through Chesapeake Bay watershed, increased economic opportunity in the agricultural sector, and built brand recognition for the regional farming community. Prior to Chesapeake Harvest, Kilmon held positions in direct sales for Comcast Spotlight and Cisco Eastern Shore. Kilmon is deeply connected to the Eastern Shore as a professional, volunteer, and resident. Currently a member of Easton Rotary, she has held director positions at the Talbot County Chamber of Commerce, Phillips Wharf Environmental Center, Easton Business Alliance, St. Michael's Business Association, and the St. Michael's Museum, among other community organizations. She received her Bachelor's of Arts from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Kilmon lives in Easton with her husband, Steve. Her 2 daughters, Sarah and Ellie, are graduates of Easton High School and VCU and Mary Washington University, respectively. They visit frequently to enjoy the beautiful Chesapeake Bay lifestyle. The family enjoys boating, kayaking, and hiking throughout the region with their rescue dogs, Tyler and Abby. Deena, welcome to the call.
Thank you so much.
So I am very excited to have this conversation on diversity and inclusion within the workplace. Like I mentioned at the top of the recording here, the intent of this series, Chamber Chat, is to have timely conversations on subject matters that are just so important to our community and our workplace. So diversity and inclusion is something that affects us all in many ways. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. So let's go ahead and start with talking a little bit about the Arc Central Chesapeake Region. Tell us a little bit about what the ARC is, and of course, the Central Chesapeake Region. What does that encompass?
Right. Can you hear me okay? I just want to check.
Yep, we can hear you.
So the ARC has been around for almost 60 years and nationally 70 years. The mission has been to support people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, however they need to be supported. And we've been around, like I said, in Anne Arundel County, began in 1961. We have many ways we support people. The service area is Anne Arundel County. And then when we talk about the Eastern Shore, it's the rest of the Eastern Shore. So that's Talbot, Caroline, Queen Anne, Kent, Dorchester, Worcester, Wycomico, and Somerset, right? How do we support people? We have 4 different divisions: children, youth, and families, workforce development, day services, FMS services, and Chesapeake Neighbors. Our Chesapeake Neighbors program supports shared and community living, which means we own houses that people live in and support them in their homes. We support them with getting jobs. We support them in their day-to-day activities. And we are also the fiscal service provider for the state of Maryland for people in the self-direction, which means the person with the disability is given a budget and they can hire someone to support them in their day-to-day life. the Arc Central Chesapeake Region is the pass-through for those funds. So over and above what we do at the regional level, we are also a state service provider for the state of Maryland.
Mm-hmm.
Nationally, there's about 1,000 ARCs, so I want to point that out. So
yeah, gotcha.
we're just one.
Right. So each location then, are they kind of independently managed and run, or do you all act as one big organization?
So they're chapters. So the state of Maryland has 10 chapters that actually provide some form of service. So some ARCs perform employment services, some ARCs have residential homes, some ARCs even have daycares. We respond to the community where we're in as to what services they really feel is necessary for the people that community is supporting. It's obviously unique with the Arc Central Chesapeake having 9 counties. Most of the ARCs in the state of Maryland support generally one county. So maybe the Arc of Montgomery County or the Arc of PG County is familiar. At the state level, there's the Arc of Maryland, and they do advocacy at the local and state and federal level. That passes down to us, and that is all pretty consistent. We are all for self-direction. We're all for individual lives and individual choice, helping people live the lives of their choosing. And then the Arc Maryland gets direction and some of that from the Arc of the United States. So it does filter down a little bit, but each Arc responds to their community as that community reaches out to them and asks for something. We try to provide that service for them.
Great. So it sounds like despite having 1,000 chapters nationwide, the ARC, based on whatever community it's in, is able to respond very nimbly to
absolutely
needs.
Yep.
Great.
Each one has its own CEO and its own board of directors that responds to directions from their community.
Mm-hmm. So what have you noticed to be the largest need here in the Central Chesapeake Eastern Shore region?
There's a lot of need for housing. We are seeing increased need for housing. Typically as someone is living with their parents, they get to that 20, 30, 40 years old maybe, and mom and dad start to realize they're not going to be around forever. So they start to reach out to help their son or daughter with disabilities find a more permanent situation. So the ARC is responding to that with our Chesapeake Neighbors program. It's actually its own nonprofit that the ARC owns, and we own about 33 homes. We are expanded those services. We also find there's a need for support services for children and young adults as they're transitioning from the high school environment, which is very protected, to work. What do you do all day after I'm at age 21? You are essentially released from the school system, and you have to determine what your lifestyle is going to be. So that's when parents tend to reach out to us. And as people start to realize that people with disabilities can do anything they want, they're starting to realize the ARC is that community service provider that helps that person follow their individual path. Mm-hmm. Getting a lot more of that, youth age parent and that family reaching out to us saying, we'd like to explore this idea. What can you do for us? So that could be supported employment, or that could be volunteer activities in the community. But the most important thing to remember about the ARC is that we are a community-based service, and COVID has slowed that down a little bit. But essentially what that means is we take the person and ask them what they want to do and take them out into the community. The ARC doesn't have a building where you go to. We take the person to whatever community place they want to go. Mm-hmm. We're starting to realize that life can be available to people with disabilities, and a lot of phone calls about that.
So for those that just joined us on this Zoom conference call, thank you for joining. You have joined Chamber Chat, and we are here with Deena Kilmon, Director of Engagement at the Arc Central Chesapeake Region, and our topic today is diversity and inclusion in the workplace. So Deena, you mentioned that the ARC works with individuals with intellectual and mental disabilities. How many individuals do you does the Arc Central Chesapeake region work with
Right.
here on the Eastern Shore?
So on the Eastern Shore, our number is hovering right around 130, 140. And that could be, again, from day services to residential supports to fiscal management services. That does not include children and families we support, because you aren't considered sort of an official participant of the ARC until you're 21. But we do support dozens of families with family navigation, which helps them like maybe understand how to write an IEP, or maybe how to get some respite care money or something like that that they don't understand. We guide them through the DDA, the Developmental Disabilities Administration system, as best we can to help them get services they need. And those services are free. So anybody can call me and say, I don't know what to do.
Right.
My child has autism. I don't know. I just got diagnosed. Where do I start? And give them a little helping hand to help them navigate that system, because it's very confusing.
Right, right. So diversity and inclusion then, of course, is somewhat descriptive in just the very words that are
Right.
being used. But I don't think people quite understand just how far and wide diversity and inclusion thoughts and actions actually spread and represent.
Right.
And in this case, with the ARC, diversity and inclusion is, especially for businesses, includes those who have intellectual and mental disabilities. So I want to talk about, how the ARC is really promoting this overall narrative for
Yeah,
businesses.
of course.
And this is certainly, I think, has several workforce development components. How is the ARC kind of taking this overall narrative and saying, look, don't forget about these individuals?
Absolutely. So what I first do is I explain what diversity and inclusion, and we also say DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion means. And a lot of people think, oh, it's race, or oh, it's gender. Oh, I've got to meet this quota for the government, so I need 3 people that look like this, and 4 people that look like this, and 6 women. And what we try to explain is diversity and inclusion is so much more than that. Diversity and inclusion isn't just looking around and seeing people that are different, but making sure that they're there, but not including them at the conversation. What we try to say is you need to pull the perspectives out of those people that you've brought to the table and understand not only, who they are, but what they can offer your company. And one of the things the funny stories that I like to bring up is, remember like back in the 90s when there was this, oh, we've got to bring women on executives teams. But if we have 1 woman on an executive team, then we'll check that box and we'll be able to write a press release that we're diverse, right? And they had women wearing those suits with the big shoulder pads, trying to look like men. That's not diversity. That is putting somebody at the table to check a box, but that's not taking into account the viewpoint that person might have had. So what we try to say is diversity and inclusion is being open to anyone that shows up that might be important to your team as an individual, and asking them what their perspective is. And, that is a big, broad topic, of course, but that includes people with disabilities, invisible and visible. And you may or may not know that you have people with disabilities at your table. It's not really even important that you understand that. What's important is making everyone feel welcome to share their perspective and their experience at your table. And that's what we are trying to bring about with talking to employers. It could be all kinds of issues that are going to come up when you start into this D&I journey, but we're here to say that once you do it, the ROI is tremendous for your company.
Mm-hmm. So if I am a business owner or even an HR personnel, how do I even know that I'm either doing the right thing or
Right.
not doing the right thing? I mean, you
Right.
don't know what you don't know. So how do we even begin to
Right.
understand how our policies are, as business owners and HR personnel? How do we begin to understand that our policies are or are not incorporating diversity and inclusion?
The quickest way, and this isn't the way that is going to solve all your problems, but the first thing you do is look at a picture of your board of directors. And I encourage people to look at a physical picture of their board of directors and see, is it diverse? If it isn't, then right at the top, you've got to say, oh man, we're missing something, you know, because if you start at the bottom, you may see some diversity just by natural presence of people in your community coming to work for you. However, if you start at the top and look at that board of directors or the executive team and you do not see diversity, then you're not doing it, right? So the first step is to self-evaluate. It really is very easy to spend 20 minutes thinking, gosh, out of my top 10 people at the top of my company, they're all in my same, you know, bowling club and they all kind of drive the same kind of car. That means I am missing out on probably a perspective of my business community that I just didn't even think about until today, right? So that's where you start. You do a self-evaluation. You set goals once you see that self-evaluation and you say, you know what, I'm going to try to reach out and hire one person that doesn't look like us, that we don't know. I'm going to reach into a different community. I'm going to talk to somebody about working for us and give them a shot at this job. You're not always going to find the perfect person every single time, but looking in different places that you haven't looked before is going to be helpful. I also say in regards to disabilities, I will ask companies a lot, do you employ someone with a disability? And it's kind of a trick question. Almost always they will say, I don't really know, or I don't think so. And what I like to tell people is, did you know that 17% of the American public identifies as having a disability? So you probably do employ people with disabilities, but you either don't know or it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
And both of those things are important to this conversation, because if you're doing a great job and it doesn't matter, you shouldn't worry so much about recruiting people with disabilities. It shouldn't be a challenge, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're already there. And if it is a challenge to you, ask yourself, why is that a challenge? Where's the fear coming from? Because really, everyone can be included and accommodated at your table. And they probably already have made some accommodations. You just need to make sure that everyone is feeling comfortable to maybe say, I need an accommodation, because may already be there. And when you do that, when you create that feeling of accessibility to your top tier team, more of your company is going to feel comfortable coming to that conclusion that you care about them as a team and that you are being inclusive. That's kind of a long roundabout way, but to say it, but self-evaluation.
Right. So I like how you mentioned it really starts at the top. And sometimes it can be as simple as just looking at your board of directors, looking at your senior leadership team. Oftentimes, pictures of those individuals are featured prominently on websites. So sometimes the research can actually be very easy to do.
Exactly.
But then trickling down to your mid-level managers and then your employees, you mentioned something interesting in that 17% of America's population identifies with some type of disability. So there are opportunities in which you may have somebody with a disability, but you just don't know. And it's not like you can ask that in an HR application. Do you have a disability? So it will oftentimes be hard to, but if you want to make a conscious effort and say, for instance, partner with your organization, what's the process that a business goes about doing that? And then how do they, and does the ARC, do you help evaluate their workplace to ensure that it is accommodating and inclusive?
Yeah, so here's the way I most likely go about this. I enjoy it when a CEO or maybe a head of HR calls me and says, I don't know where I am. And one of the first things I might say to them is, if I'm Deena Kilmon and I work for you and I break my leg, let's say, or I go on the shooting range and blow my eardrums out. How do I come to you and ask for a request for maybe a quieter room, or a different sort of desk, or a different sort of chair, or maybe a wheelchair ramp because I'm going to be on crutches for 3 weeks? How do I ask you that? So don't even worry about, big giant things. Think about the smallest person or the smallest request you might have from somebody that already works for you. How do they do that? Is it a respected place? Like, do they feel comfortable saying, I'm going to need this for a couple of weeks, or I'm going to need this for 6 months? If you feel like people are pretty good about talking to you, then you're already on your way. If you feel like, oh, wow, no, that's a big deal because they're worried about that might cost money, or they may, be looked at funny if they ask for, maybe a dark room or hearing aid or something like that, then that's where you start. And they don't even need me necessarily to tell them that's where they are. But what we can do is say, set up a confidential, respectful way. Anyone can ask you for accommodations within your company, and you will start on that path of making it easier for everyone to ask for that accommodation. We also talk to HR people about how they're recruiting and what their job descriptions look like. One of the greatest things that has happened during COVID is that we've understood that telework works. We're teleworking right now. Right. So one of the accommodations you were worried about is transportation, or how's that person going to get to work because they have a wheelchair, or they don't have a car because their income is not, they haven't had the means to buy a car. So we can't look at that person as an employee. That's all out the window now. So look at your job descriptions. Does it say they have to be at work 9 to 5, or does it say they have to get the work done? And the manager's going to talk about how we do that. That's where you start. Those job descriptions need to start to change and be accommodating and be open to people that can come to you and say, I'm not the best driver, but I can log in every morning and I can do that accounting work for you. How are you feeling about that? How's your HR department handling those things? How do their job descriptions read? How are they recruiting people? Those are the questions I ask, and I'm more than happy to talk to anybody about that sort of thing. There's a whole list of things we can go through.
Mm-hmm. So, what's really interesting is that whenever businesses engage in this conversation, I think they always go in who are trying to make a conscious effort to be more inclusive and equitable. I feel as if, because this is also the way I think, that what you're about to go through, the process that you're about to go through, is going to require making massive changes. But what you're saying is that there are a lot of little things that businesses can do to have an impact, and a dramatic impact, because a lot of those little things add up to help a business well on their way to be equitable. So I like the idea of having just a process ready to go for employees to essentially see, here is what you can do to accommodate me better. How many businesses do something like that? That's just so simple.
So it's not as many as you would think. If you ask anybody on the street, do they have I gave a presentation to a Wycomico County group of executives probably about maybe a year ago. And I asked them how many had a diversity and inclusion mission statement. How many people even knew what I was talking about? And out of this group of 60 business guys, the one guy that raised his hand actually was a disability service provider. And he goes, "We have one." And I'm like, right. All right, guys, what about the rest of you? And they were like, wow, we never thought about that. So, and you can look at corporate America, though. Now I'm talking locally. You look at corporate America and the Forbes 500 companies that are doing the best. The top 500 companies, majority of them, if not 100% of them, have a D&I statement, a program, maybe a diversity and inclusion office that really starts to listen to their employees and take the temperature of their companies, because they know those companies that have an inclusion policy and really believe it and live it have about a 34% higher return on the stock market. That is a proven fact. And I can send you the research that shows that. One big company that does a great job is Ernst & Young. And they went through this whole entire process of actually talking to their employees about how they felt. They had a private, confidential survey of their many thousands, I guess it could even be millions now, of Ernst & Young employees, and said, how do you feel about this? If we talk about diversity and inclusion and whether you're feeling comfortable, maybe saying that you need help with something, how do you feel about that? And they were quite shocked to find out that a lot of people they employed were already basically had a disability that they were either hiding or accommodating in, the best way they could. And when it was brought out to them that they could talk about it, they were pleasantly surprised that everyone did start to talk about it and people's viewpoints started to come to the table. And they actually have established a whole office that works with people of not just the disability, but any sort of kind of issue that comes to the table that you feel like I need to talk about it because I feel different, but maybe it's a good thing. They've got a whole office to talk about it, and they have policies in place to self-identify, to make you feel comfortable, to make you feel that you're not going to be discriminated against in the workforce if you say, I need something. And that could be many different issues. It could come down to even my dad is sick, I need to stay home for a few weeks. They are listening to those people and they are finding their employee retention is tremendous. And Ernst & Young snaps their fingers and recruits the best of the best. So that's what I need to say to the HR people. You need to do it. Ask your company, take your temperature, take your internal temperature, and you'll realize that it's a good thing to do that.
Right.
And for your company will start from there.
So that's a really good transition because I want to delve into the return on investment businesses and organizations can have when they adopt a more inclusive mindset. So,
Absolutely.
You just mentioned Ernst & Young, a big accounting firm, and other Fortune 500 companies. That's great that this overall internal mindset is showing dividends for those companies and their shareholders. But I'm just a small business. I have 10 employees, or I'm a nonprofit that has 1 or 2 employees, but we serve an entire community. How can these businesses and organizations that are operating on a much smaller scale, how can they start to adopt this mindset? And then what are the returns that are small mom and pop oriented businesses? What are the returns on investments that?
Absolutely. Those are great questions. And I will tell you, it does one thing. It allows you to recruit from your entire community if you're thinking in this manner. So even if you only have 10 employees, but you need 12, where are those 2 people coming from? If you're just looking at the friends or the people that or this kind of group that you normally recruit from, that limits you, right? So if you look at your entire community, there might be disenfranchised groups that you had not thought of before. Maybe you need to reach into those groups. One of the things I look at when you're recruiting people is, do you typically use the newspaper, which a lot of the older HR firms and a lot of the older companies, doesn't matter how big or small, they think the newspaper is the only way to recruit people. Not true, obviously. Hardly anyone gets a printed newspaper anymore. So, you start there and you expand your recruitment base. You also start to retain people because they feel more committed to the company that they feel like they're welcome at, and they will help you recruit people. They also, if you have a diverse structure, it also expands your customer base. I mean, we found a lot of companies don't realize that maybe they're selling cars to, one type of person. But when they have different types of car salesmen that look different and act different and are different, those different populations will come buy cars from them. So you could be a car dealership with 5 employees, but if they all look like the same person, you're not attracting all the customers you could attract because people may or may not, your consumers may or not feel comfortable coming to someone that they don't really identify with. So the smallest company will have a return there when they expand their customer base and they expand their recruitment and in their community on who they are bringing on board. One of the things that I get a lot of questions about is millennials. How do I get young people? Well, let me tell you, and I wrote down some statistics for you. So I looked at some studies this morning, and it said 69% of young people, millennials, young people prefer a company that is diverse, and they prefer a company that understands that as a value and inclusion as a value. So if you're in Kent County and you're looking at your young people, and I know you guys are struggling with that, you want the young people to stay, you have to move forward in this direction, because that is what young people are looking for. They are looking for, doesn't matter if it's the tiny firm, the insurance firm with the 3 guys or 3 women or whoever it may be. The young person they want to come on board is going to expect an atmosphere of diversity and inclusion and creativity, and they want that. So if you want that young person, you need to understand that this is where you need to go.
Mm-hmm. So, talking a little bit more about diverse teams, because you made it very clear that you can get an immediate return on your investment. And I also liked how you said, you may have 10 employees, but you might need 12. And where are those additional 2 going to come from? Because you hear a lot from businesses that they oftentimes have a hard time finding employees. And sometimes that just means you have to cast a broader net. So let's talk a little bit about overall team dynamics then when you start incorporating a more diverse workforce. So going back to your millennial comment, where the initial team might be just a group of older people, but they realize and recognize the need to bring on younger talent, but that might not necessarily gel or jive with the current team dynamic. So when you adopt a more inclusive mindset, it's great to be able to cast a wider net and have diversity reflected in your overall team. But then what does a business do after they've onboarded and they've been more inclusive in their approach? How do they maintain team cohesion and just overall team dynamics, especially when they are now much more inclusive and diverse?
So that's a good question. So one thing, they don't bring them on and sit them at the table and tell them to watch and listen. So you've been a part of that, you get on a board of directors and they're like, oh, that's the new guy. You just listen to what we do, you'll pick up. Don't do that. You've brought someone new in because they're different, they're young, they have a different color of skin, they have a different ability level, whatever it is. You brought them in because you need to understand their perspective. So ask them, bring them to the table, ask them questions. What are you feeling about working here? How do you feel about our strategy? What are we missing from your point of view, from your community's point of view? What are we missing? Ask them. Also assign a mentor. We've seen this, and we do this at the Arc for the people with disabilities. Have someone that's a natural support that agrees with your strategy. That's why you have to start at the top. You start with that CEO or that leadership team, and you say, okay, guys, who wants to help me with this? Because this is going to be a little, we're gonna integrate some people, some new ideas, some new things here, but I need some support. So find the people in your company that think this is a good idea, that understand why you're doing it, and say, I need you to watch Joe. He's gonna be here. Maybe he's not from Kent County. Maybe he's from Talbot. He's coming from Dorchester. How do we integrate that person into our culture? You watch Joe and let me know if he's not doing well, or if he needs some support. Maybe you reach out and take him out for a cup of coffee. So that's one of the things we say is make sure it's coming from the top, that you're bringing people in because you value their opinion, and maybe assign a mentor that can support that person. In the case of the Arc, our job coaches, or you may have called them employment advisors, it depends on what you call them within the disability service provider. So like at the Kent Center, they may call them employment advisors or something like that. That person will help the person with disability understand the functions and tasks they're assigned at the company, and kind of forms a little mentor support system for them. And then they find people within the company that also have that mindset that they want to support that young person or that person. And it starts to perform sort of a natural support system within the company. And those people will start to find each other, and it'll grow as a support system. And the loyalty you find from the people that have been embraced into your culture is really, it starts to make a difference in employee morale as well. And you'll see people start to think, God, the company's changing. We're feeling this. This is feeling good. This is feeling innovative. And it will start to build on itself.
So what you're saying is it's not good enough to bring people into the room.
That's right.
To the table.
That's right. You've got to ask them for their opinion. Make sure they're talking. If they're sitting quietly and they never contribute to a meeting, or they're looking sort of like frustrated, ask them why. Hey, you wanted to be here. We wanted you here. Are you feeling like something's not clicking? Please explain it to me. Because I think if you're having honest, open conversations with people, that's going to go a long way.
Right. So, I also want to talk a little bit about how this impacts our nonprofits, because, it can still be just a little bit different for them, because especially here on the shore, we have some nonprofits that are, large businesses outright. But many of them are one or one and a half or two people operations. So there's really not that much of a room, let alone a table to have people come to. But of course, you're still serving your community, which is comprised of a wide variety of individuals. So if you are that small nonprofit, what does diversity and inclusion mean to those organizations, and how do they adopt this mindset?
There's a couple things. One is your board, even if you're one person, or, I think of like a Caroline Casa, I think has 2 or 3 employees. That's it. However, their board has like 10 people. So it's kind of looking at their board of directors and saying, is the board of directors diverse? The ARC makes sure we recruit people with disabilities to be represented on our board, and we hire people with disabilities to be in our company. So it doesn't matter how big or small you are, you can start with that board of directors to make sure that there's some diversity there. Also, if you're serving a mission for your community and you just don't quite know how to reach into all of your community, have a meeting, have a meeting at the Chamber of Commerce, or, call you guys and say, I just want a bunch of nonprofits to come together, because from my perspective, I think I'm serving the whole community, but maybe from all these other leaders, maybe I'm not. So how do I reach into those other communities, those other neighborhoods maybe, and say, I don't think we've had I think of Meals on Wheels. Maybe we've not had a delivery to that neighborhood. I wonder why. Maybe I should call away. Maybe I should call their church nearby and ask them, how do we get into that community? I think it's Cambridge that has a diversity and inclusion committee that advises the county council. So if there's something like that in your county, go to it, and explain who you are. If there isn't, consider beginning one yourself. I know in Talbot County, I have reached out to one of our county councilmen, and we are working with several other nonprofit leaders to loosely form something we're going to call, I think, Inclusive Easton, to try to bring some of those viewpoints to the table, because we don't really have a committee like that in Easton. So create something if you don't have it, but if you do have it, reach out and maybe you'll see where you're not performing your mission as you should.
Mm-hmm. So I am a small business or a nonprofit, and all of this sounds great, but Deena, I've tried. I have
I've heard this too.
Sent out communications, e-blasts. I've sent out flyers. I've made the announcement from the mountaintops, but we can still only attract a certain type of people. What am I doing wrong? And do I get a pass from the whole diversity and
No.
inclusion conversation because we tried our hardest, but we haven't seen anything change. What do you say to businesses like that?
One of the things that we start with again is how do your job descriptions read? Because that seems really simple, but it isn't. So how do those read? Do they read inclusive? The other thing is, where are you placing those job ads? Have somebody like me look at it and say, let me tell you about the data about where young people actually are recruited from. They're on Snapchat and Reddit and, all kinds of crazy apps that you guys don't, these older gentlemen and ladies maybe not even know exist, right? I don't even know them all. So for one thing, you've got to talk to somebody like me or somebody that is a D&I professional and say, what am I doing wrong here? You've got one in your community, Ron Jordan, who's a diversity and inclusion specialist for attorneys. Call Ron. Say, man, I don't know, this isn't working. What am I doing? So when you look at the perspective of a professional from this side, we can help you understand that while you think you may be inclusive, maybe you're not quite grasping what that means. And I'm happy to do that for anybody, is, to talk them through it. But the main thing is, if you're trying to recruit like a young person, for example, have a young person walk into your office, look around, look at your job descriptions, and ask them, would you work here? And if they go, no, I don't see a Keurig machine, I don't see internet. Where do I log in? You're going to find that even if you think you're where you want to be, maybe you're not quite there, and you need the person that you're trying to attract. You need their opinion to figure out what's missing in your little, your little world that's not attracting those people to you.
So, sometimes all it takes is to get feedback from even people that are in our home, as our children or our teenagers.
Absolutely.
Would you work here? And I think that would be a very interesting feedback that they would end up getting if they were to ask their own kids. So
And brace yourself. Brace yourself.
Right.
Because if you don't want the truth, move on.
So I want to allow some of our callers to ask questions. And since we are using Zoom, many of them are logged in on their computer. So if you have a question, please use the chat feature to submit your question. And then if you dialed in, what I'll go ahead and do is I will unmute the callers here, the participants who have not logged in on a computer, and I will go ahead and ask for any questions. So, but if you are logged in on a computer, please use the chat feature to submit your question. And we have one. It says, can you ask her about the financial commitment that often comes with board service and how to handle it when the people you serve and might want it to be represented on your board are low income?
That's a great question. So not everything can be measured in money, right? So I would ask that person what they can contribute. It's usually give or get. So if you can access someone that you want to come on the board because you need their perspective, you may ask them, what other things can you contribute? Can you volunteer your time? Can you give me access to some of your community members that I need access to? Can you walk with me to maybe a big car dealership and explain the mission and maybe help me get some money that way? Because you bought a car there and the guy that runs the place, So there's ways that people of low income can certainly contribute, and you need their perspective. You're serving typically those people. So you need somebody on the board to tell you, whoa, this is where you're missing the mark. So I would work with that person and ask them what they feel they can contribute, particularly if it's somebody that really feels like their cause is that your cause is their cause and they want to be on the board. I would never let money stop me. I would ask them to help me brainstorm how they can bring their ideas to the table.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really good feedback because you're right. So often the money conversation is oftentimes one of those unsaid asks with regards to serving on a board. That expectation is always there. And you never want to put somebody who's low income in a compromising position. And that's
Right.
also kind of a part of being inclusive. You don't want to have everybody around a board table and say, all right, what's your contribution level? And people are saying, I'll contribute $1,000, I'll contribute
Right.
$500. And that one person is just kind of, looking inwards, just wondering, what am I doing here?
Yeah, our board development director, I think her official title is longer than that, but our development director has private conversations with our board members. It's not a public conversation about your level of giving. It's a private conversation. And the CEO valuing that person at the table is all the rest of the board should need to know. And that person is valuable. They're there. You don't need to know how much money they're contributing.
Right.
It's their concern. So I would advise privacy and discretion.
Mm-hmm. Great. So we have another question that came in. So if you are starting by asking your current employees about your organization, what types of questions should be asked, and is there a good survey to use?
Oh, that's a great question. I could look that up. I'll write a note. So
Okay.
maybe a list of questions, if I can find like an official source, because I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Probably the most telling question will be asking someone if they feel like they need something. Maybe I need, like I was saying, speakers because I can't hear anymore. I'm aging. I'm now 62, or I'm 73, or maybe I'm 47, and I just listened to too many rock concerts. How do I ask for those speakers without feeling uncomfortable?
Mm-hmm.
How do I ask for an accommodation? We know typically the accommodations that people need are anywhere from $0 to $500. And that is an average nationally about what that costs your company. However, what stops people is they don't know how to ask you, or they feel uncomfortable asking. So one of the first questions to ask people is, if you needed something, how would you ask me? Do you go to HR? Is there a private email you use? What do you do? If you feel uncomfortable, do we have a policy on somebody said something I didn't feel comfortable about? Is there a way to report that's private and respectful, and a way to discuss that conversation about maybe having D&I training, diversity and inclusion training for your company, so that everyone treats everyone else respectfully? How do they start those conversations? So that is really the main question I would ask. How do we talk about things? What do we do? Who's the person that's unbiased and respectful and can remain confidential? And am I going to not be retaliated against if I speak up? That is the number one question.
So would you recommend initiating that process with, say, like a Dropbox that people can write a comment and drop it in, or sending out an email, posting it on a TAC board? What's the best way to kind of get this message out to your employees to facilitate that feedback?
That's a great question. And I just think it depends on your company culture. There's Ernst & Young. Actually, I go back to them because the lady that I saw speak on it was such a dynamic speaker that it was incredible. And one of the things they did, now this was a bigger conversation about self-identifying whatever your thing was. She had people videotape themselves saying what they felt, who they were, and how they fit into the company, and they emailed them to her. That was a really open conversation, right? So you may or may not go that route. But if your company is a little more old-fashioned, yeah, why not have a Dropbox? But what you have to remember is what they put in that Dropbox has to be treated as a real request, a respectful request, and you have to have a way to share it with the whole company. A good thing would be like maybe somebody's telling, stories about, oh, let's go with the Trump versus Biden. Maybe there's too much political talk and someone is really not wanting to hear that political talk anymore. So they leave a little suggestion in your Dropbox because maybe they feel like, I'm feeling uncomfortable here because I go for this guy and you go for that guy, and I don't know how to be on this team anymore. You have to have a way at your staff meeting or whatever it is to communicate, hey guys, we're all here to work for the company. Let's leave that talk at home, you have to have a way to get that thing done and communicate it to everyone so that that person that brought it to your attention isn't singled out, and that's the key. So,
Right.
so that's why I say, ask yourself, how does that happen now with someone who needs something? How does that get communicated to the company? Think about how tweaking that so that it can be, respectful of everyone.
Right. So you will look into kind of like a template, something that's
Yeah,
already
there's got
created.
to be a list of questions somewhere.
Mhm. And
And there's
I can go ahead. I'll leave my contact information, and that way, the person who asked this question, they can reach out to me, and as soon as you respond, I'll go ahead and get you all connected. So let me leave my contact info. My email address is sshoge, that is SSHOGE at kentchamber.org. So, Deena, as soon as you find either that template, so our callers and participants don't have to recreate or reinvent the wheel.
Sure, yeah.
It's proven that they can really just get started with right now would be a great start.
Absolutely. And also, we'll be, really in trouble if I don't mention our workforce report that we just put out. So we spent 9 months doing a workforce study, and it was sponsored in part by the Rural Maryland Council. It's a 50-page study on looking at this in your company, and it does focus on people with disabilities, but it gives you some real insight on how to start to incorporate some of these things into your company structure. So I can send that to you. It's on our website, the arcccr.org. I think it's like /workforce report or something like that, but I can certainly give you that link to that 50-page report because it's a good start. It has lots of research on different companies across the region, locally, as well as the United States, on how this can integrate into your company and what it means to have a company culture that adopts diversity inclusion, how it affects your bottom line. There's quotes from local employers in Easton and locally on how it has made a positive impact on their company's culture and their return on that. It also talks about other disability service providers in your community that can work with you. I'm not the only one. You've got Kent Center, Benedictine, Caroline Center, all these other places can speak on that as well. And also on September 15th, we're having a virtual seminar where people can log in. And Jeff Trice, who was the primary on that workforce study, will be explaining that study. So I will get you the information on how to log in for that as well.
Great. Thank you very much. So
Sure.
before I open the floor for questions, Deena, what is your contact information if people want to chat with you more?
So you don't even have to write anything down. If you go on LinkedIn, you can message me there under Deena Kilmon. Easy. My email, though, is the easiest one to remember is resources@thearcccr.org. You can go on Facebook. I'm there. You can go find me on Twitter and Instagram as Deena Kilmon. So any of those ways, I will respond to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Deena. So
Sure.
if you are joining in on this conversation via Zoom and you are on your computer or iPad, please go ahead and use the chat box to submit any questions. But I am going to unmute the people who have called in. And if you have a question, simply go ahead and ask. So give me one moment. I am going to unmute our callers and we will see if anybody has a question.
Don't be scared.
Nope. Still, give me 1 second. Still unmuting here. And for some reason, Zoom isn't letting me unmute everybody. Didn't think this one through, how people could submit questions. Since I don't have the ability to, oh, here we go, unmute all. How about that?
There you go.
Okay. So all of our callers have been unmuted. So if you have a question, go ahead and ask, please. Any questions at all?
I see they're muted, but I don't know if that's, I'm seeing Jackie is not muted, but everybody else looks muted.
But you did leave your contact information, so.
Let me put it in the chat box, Sam, too. So it's easy if people can see, but they can't talk. That is how you can reach me, or D. Kilmon at arccr.org. And then if you're more comfortable with the phone, I can give you my phone number.
Okay. And I'll go ahead and read this for everybody who has called in and who don't have the ability to see the chat box. So any questions for the people who have called in and don't have access to the chat feature, you can reach Deena in multiple ways. Resources at the Arc CCR.
There's 3 C's. So remember when you're typing, it's Arc.
Yep. Or D Kilmon, that's DKILMON at the arccr.org. And the ARC is spelled the ARCCCR.org, or by phone 410-829-4052. Sorry again about the inability to unmute all of our callers to ask questions. But we will go ahead and end the call here. Deena, thank you so much. This has been a phenomenal conversation. Thank you so much for joining and having this conversation about diversity and inclusion in the workplace.
Well, Sam, I really appreciate it. I just have to say, I think it's a fantastic time. I think COVID has brought out the best in many of us, and the time to be innovative and the time to dream is now. So please call me if you want to talk it over. The ARC has always been here. It's been almost 70 years we've been here to help people reach their full potential. And that is across the board. We're here to help.
Great. Thank you again, Deena. And you have listened to Chamber Chat. My name is Sam Shoge. I'm the Executive Director of the Kent County Chamber of Commerce. And you can certainly learn more about the Chamber. And if you would like to join the Chamber of Commerce, log on to www.kentchamber.org to find out more information about us. You can also reach me by email. My email address is sshoge, that is SSHOGE at kentchamber.org. Thank you all for joining us. Deena, thank you again, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.